Arrogant. That's the only word for it. The elevator doors hadn't even finished closing before he opened his mouth. Have you ever walked into a room, your building, your name on the lease, and been told to leave? Not kindly. Not with any attempt at grace. Just told, flat out, like you were something tracked in on the bottom of somebody's shoe. That's exactly what happened to Vivienne Okafor, 41 years old, on the morning of March 4th. The same morning she was supposed to be signing the final paperwork that would make the Harlow Grand Hotel officially, legally, entirely hers. Let me take you back, because the full picture matters here. The Harlow Grand sat at the corner of Michigan Avenue and Erie Street in Chicago. 17 floors of Italian marble and old money. It had been a landmark since 1962. The kind of hotel where senators stayed, where movie producers held meetings in the restaurant booths, where the concierge knew every guest's preferred newspaper before they even asked. For the last 3 years, it had been quietly bleeding money. Bad management. Worse decisions. The previous ownership group had mortgaged the name against a renovation that never happened, and by January they were done. Out of options. Ready to sell to anyone with the capital and the nerve. Vivienne had both. She hadn't come from money. She'd come from a 2-bedroom apartment in Gary, Indiana, where her mother worked nights at a laundry facility, and her father had driven a delivery truck until his back gave out. What Vivienne had was a mind that didn't quit, and a habit of seeing things other people walked right past. She'd started in hospitality at 19, front desk at a mid-range chain in Indianapolis. By 26, she was managing a full property. By 33, she owned her first one, a 40-room boutique hotel in Evanston that she'd turned profitable in 11 months flat. Then another. Then 2 more. By the time she was 40, she was running a portfolio of 9 properties across 3 states, all of them thriving, none of them flashy, all of them built on the same principle she'd learned watching her mother. You take care of what's yours, and you don't make noise about it. The Harlow Grand was her 10th acquisition, the biggest, the one she'd wanted for 5 years. She didn't announce herself when she arrived that morning. That wasn't her style. She came alone, no assistant, no entourage, no driver waiting at the curb. She wore dark slacks, a navy jacket, and low-heeled boots. Her natural hair was pulled back simply. She carried a leather folio under one arm, the kind you get from years of use, not the kind you buy to look important. She'd come early, 40 minutes before the scheduled meeting with the outgoing ownership group and the attorneys, because she liked to walk a property before she sat down to discuss it. Always had. She wanted to feel it. See what the staff was like when no one was performing. She crossed the lobby slowly, taking in the details. The marble at the entrance, chipped in 2 places near the revolving door, fixable. The flower arrangement at the main desk, beautiful, fresh, that was something. The lighting above the check-in counter was too yellow, made everyone look tired. She noted it. She noticed a bellman, moving efficiently across the floor, unhurried but not lazy. She filed that away too. She was standing near the concierge desk, studying the ceiling molding when he found her. Derek Paulson, 52 years old, regional director of operations for the outgoing ownership group. He didn't introduce himself that way. He didn't introduce himself at all. "Excuse me." His voice came from behind her left shoulder, and it had that particular texture, clipped, impatient, the kind of voice that's used to people stepping aside. "This area is for hotel guests and staff only." Vivienne turned around. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that fit well. Silver at his temples. A face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago and had since settled into the assumption of authority. He was looking at her the way certain men look at certain women in certain spaces, like a question he'd already decided the answer to. "I'm aware," Vivienne said. "Then I'll need you to move toward the guest lounge or the exit." He said it pleasantly enough. That was the thing. The pleasantness made it worse, somehow, like he was doing her a favor by being polite about it. We have a private function beginning shortly, and I need this floor clear." Vivienne looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. "What's your name?" she asked. Something flickered across his face. Mild irritation at being questioned. "Derek Paulson. I'm Regional Director of Operations." "Okay, Derek." She shifted the folio under her arm. "I think I'll stay." The pleasantness left his face then. Not all at once. In pieces. "I'm sorry?" "I said I'll stay." She said it without heat, without performance. Just fact. "I have a meeting in this building in 38 minutes, and I like to arrive early." He looked at her, really looked at her, and whatever he was assessing, she came up short in his calculation. She could see it happening. The navy jacket, the natural hair, the boots, no jewelry worth mentioning, no designer bag. She didn't look, to Derek Paulson's eye, like someone with a meeting at the Harlow Grand. "A meeting," he repeated. The pleasantness was entirely gone now, replaced by something thinner. "With whom, exactly?" "With your legal team and the outgoing board," she said, "among others." He actually smiled at that. A small, tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes because it isn't meant to. "Ma'am, I don't know what you've been told or who you spoke with, but that meeting is a private acquisition conference." He lowered his voice like he was letting her off a hook. "It's not open to the public. Whatever mix-up happened, I'm sure we can sort it out at the front desk. But I'm going to have to ask you to step this way. I'm not a mix-up." Her voice was still even. She hadn't raised it once. "My name is Vivienne Okafor. I'm the buyer." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. Derek Paulson stood very still, and for exactly 3 seconds, you could see the gears working behind his eyes. Disbelief cycling toward recalculation, cycling back toward disbelief. Because the math didn't add up for him. Vivienne Okafor didn't look like what Derek Paulson thought a buyer for the Harlow Grand looked like. She didn't look like what he'd spent 30 years in this industry deciding that person had to be. "I'm going to need to verify that," he said finally. "Go ahead." She said it like she was offering him a glass of water. He pulled out his phone, turned slightly away from her. She watched him scroll, watched him stop, watched the back of his neck change color. He turned back around. The smile was gone completely. "Ms. Okafor, you can call me Vivienne." His jaw moved. "Miss Okafor, I apologize for the no." She held up one hand, not unkindly. "Not yet. I want to finish my walkthrough first." And she turned back toward the ceiling, molding like he wasn't there. But here's the thing. That wasn't even the moment that changed everything. Because Derek Paulson, and this is the part that tells you everything you need to know about a certain kind of person, didn't learn from it. He recalibrated, he regrouped, and then he made the decision that people like Derek Paulson always make, which is to double down instead of rethink. She'd taken maybe 20 steps toward the staircase that led to the mezzanine when she heard him behind her, his voice louder now, aimed not just at her, but at the 2 front desk clerks who'd looked up, at the bellman crossing the lobby, at the morning shift manager who'd just come through the service corridor. "I'm going to need you to stop." Vivienne stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. This building is still under the management of this ownership group until close of business on Friday. His voice had an edge to it now that hadn't been there before. Not anger exactly, but the sound of a man reasserting something he felt was being taken from him. "That means my authority in this building is current and binding, and I'm telling you that you do not have clearance to access restricted areas without an escort." She turned around slowly. The lobby was quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that means everyone is listening and pretending not to. "Derek." Her voice was patient. Patient the way a river is patient. It will get where it's going. "I signed the preliminary agreement in December. The final transfer documents are sitting in conference room C right now, waiting for signatures that include mine. The only thing standing between me and full ownership of this building is 45 minutes and some paperwork. Now." She tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to revisit this conversation, or would you like to continue?" He stared at her. Something happened in his face. A kind of crowding. All the competing things he was feeling pressing against the surface. Embarrassment, pride. The instinct to retreat, and the instinct to push forward fighting each other in real time. He chose wrong. "I don't care what paperwork is sitting in what room." He said it quietly, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "In this building right now, today, I am the authority. And I'm telling you to wait in the guest lounge until someone from our legal team can escort you properly." Vivienne was quiet for a long moment. Around the lobby, no one moved. Then she reached into the folio under her arm and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She held it out to him. He looked at it without taking it. "That's the Interim Management Authority Clause from the acquisition agreement," she said. "Signed by your CEO last week. It grants me operational oversight of this property effective as of 8 o'clock this morning." She checked her watch. It's 8:42. The front desk clerk, a young woman, early 20s, name tag that said Brianna, was staring at the paper like she was watching a car accident in very slow motion. Derek Paulson did not take the paper. "I'll need to verify that with counsel," he said. "Of course." Vivienne tucked it back into the folio. "I'll be on the mezzanine." She walked up the stairs. Before we get to conference room C and what happened when Derek Paulson walked through that door, let me tell you something about the way Vivienne Okafor operated, because it matters for understanding what came next. She had a rule she'd kept her entire career. Her mother had given it to her, not as advice exactly, more as a story. Her mother used to say, "Don't correct a man who's digging his own hole. Just make sure you're not standing in it when it's done." Vivienne had never forgotten that. So when Derek Paulson walked into conference room C at 9:15, already late, already red around the collar, already half prepared to explain or defend or deflect whatever was coming, he was not prepared for what he actually found. Vivienne was seated at the head of the table. Not the side, not a guest chair, the head. She had set up her laptop, had 3 documents open in front of her, and was in quiet conversation with James Ellery, the lead attorney for the acquisition, a man Derek had worked with for 6 years and regarded as something close to an ally. James was nodding at something Vivienne was saying. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man who was exactly where he expected to be. The outgoing CEO, Raymond Chu, was seated to Vivienne's left. Raymond was 67, tired in the way of someone who has been tired for a long time and stopped hiding it, and when he looked up and saw Derek in the doorway, his expression was not the expression of someone who was going to be helpful. "Derek," he said. The single word had the weight of an entire conversation neither of them was going to have in this room. Derek looked at Vivienne. Vivienne was looking at her laptop. Then she looked up. She didn't say anything right away, just looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not unkind, not triumphant, not particularly anything. The look of a woman who has been managing situations like this her entire life and has long since moved past the part where they surprise her. "Derek," she said finally, "close the door and find a seat." He stood in the doorway for a long beat, the last moment before the last door shuts, and then he came in and sat down. The meeting took 2.5 hours. Vivienne didn't perform, didn't make speeches, didn't turn any of it into a scene. She worked through the documents with James, asked pointed questions about the maintenance contracts, pushed back on a liability clause that had been buried on page 41 and that the outgoing team's attorney had clearly hoped nobody would catch, and caught it. Raymond Chu watched her work and said very little, but at one point, about 90 minutes in, he looked across the table at James and said, quietly, "She's going to be fine." And James nodded, and that was the most the room said about any of it. Derek sat at the far end of the table and said almost nothing. At the end of the meeting, James slid the final transfer documents across the table. Vivienne read every page, all 47 of them. Nobody rushed her. At page 31 she paused, made a note in the margin, flagged it for a minor amendment. James handled it without fanfare. Then she signed, and just like that, the Harlow Grand was hers. The outgoing team began gathering their things. Raymond Chu shook Vivienne's hand for a long moment. Both hands looked at her in that way of someone who wants to say more than the room allows, and then he left. The attorneys filed out. Derek was the last one remaining. He had his briefcase on the table, his jacket over his arm, and he was standing the way people stand when they know a conversation is coming that they cannot avoid and would give almost anything to avoid. Vivienne was still at the head of the table, closing her laptop. She didn't look up immediately. Let the room be quiet for a moment. Derek. She finally looked at him. Mrs. Okafor. His voice had lost its texture from the morning. It was flat now. I want to say, I owe you an apology. What happened this morning was, it was a choice. She said it simply. Not cruelly, but without softening it into something it wasn't. People make choices, and then they live with them. He nodded. He seemed like he was about to say something else. She opened the folio again and placed a single sheet of paper on the table, slid it toward him. He looked down at it. His name was on it. Have you ever seen the moment when a person realizes, fully realizes, that a thing has actually happened? Not the anticipation of it. Not the abstract understanding. The actual, concrete, irreversible knowledge that a door has closed? That's what his face looked like. I run a lean operation, Derek. Her voice was even. I always have. The regional director role is redundant under my management structure, and honestly, that was true before this morning. But I want to be clear with you about something. She folded her hands on the table. This isn't because of what happened in the lobby. I'm not that petty, and I want you to know that. This is a business decision I made weeks ago. Your position was always going to be eliminated in the transition. That's just the reality. He stood very still. But, she continued, what happened this morning? The way you spoke to me twice, in front of staff, that is a separate matter, and it's one I'll be documenting. Not to punish you, because it's the professional thing to do, because the next place you work deserves to know. She stood up, picked up her folio, and pushed in her chair. HR will be in contact about the separation package. It's fair. I made sure of that. She moved toward the door. One more thing. She paused at the threshold, looked back at him over her shoulder, not with malice, with something closer to honesty. That young woman at the front desk, Brianna. She didn't flinch when you raised your voice this morning. She kept her composure, stayed professional. That's the kind of person I build teams with. A slight pause. You might want to think about what that says. She walked out of conference room C down the corridor, through the mezzanine, past the staircase. By the time she reached the lobby, she had already pulled out her phone and was scrolling through her notes from the walkthrough. The cracked marble near the revolving door. The lighting above the check-in counter. The maintenance contracts she needed to renegotiate before the end of the quarter. Brianna was still at the front desk when Vivienne crossed the lobby. Their eyes met briefly. Vivienne gave her a single nod. Brianna straightened slightly, and the expression on her face was something between relief and recognition, the particular look of someone who has been seen, properly seen, maybe for the first time in a while. Outside, Michigan Avenue was cold and bright, that particular March cold that Chicago saves for the days late when you think winter might finally be over. Vivienne stood on the sidewalk for a moment, face turned toward the sun, and took one long, slow breath. 17 floors, Italian marble, her name on nothing yet. The physical signage would take weeks. But everything that mattered had already shifted. You could feel it in the way the building sat behind her. Different weight, different center of gravity. Her phone buzzed, her assistant checking in. 3 other properties had sent overnight reports. There was a vendor dispute in Evanston, a staffing issue in Milwaukee, and a message from the contractor who was supposed to begin the renovation at the Michigan Avenue property, this property, by April. She started typing back. She had work to do. The Harlow Grand's new chapter had started at 8:42 in the morning. In the time it takes a man to decide that what he sees is all there is to see. And it would be written, like all of Vivienne's chapters, in the quiet language of work done well and decisions made without apology. Derek Paulson cleaned out his office that afternoon. Nobody saw him leave. Brianna was promoted to lead front desk supervisor 8 weeks later. And Vivienne Okafor, 41 years old, never once looked back at the elevator doors she'd already walked through.